Okay, so now we get into some of the actual types of structures that we can create with organizations. And a lot of this is pretty obvious and intuitive, so I'm hoping I'm not going to get too bogged down in it because I think it'll be fairly obvious once we get into it. But let's dive in. So we've got these different, so this is the actual structure, right? So where you think of the little boxes and how the boxes connect to each other, what does that look like? And so we have our simple structure, which is where we, a very small business will have a simple structure because it's not going to have enough people often to have boxes. It's just going to have names. And so we've got very few departments. We've got wide spans of control. Often authority is centralized in a single person because there's only one boss, and very little formalization. A functional structure is one where we've got those different specializations grouped together. So the example we saw about the sort of generic record company where we've got the label, and then we've got like the admin and the accounting type people, and then we've got the marketing department, all that sort of stuff. Divisional structure we might think of as mushroom group might be, you might think of a little bit as an example of this because we've got these separate business units, which for them, in their case, are actually separate businesses and business entities. But in large kind of businesses, you might have different business units, like you might have divisions that are attached to, say, geographical regions, or you might have a business unit that's a particular product range, for example. So let's say an organization like Nike, they might have a business unit that's for women's wear, and they might have a business unit for menswear, or they might have a business unit that's just about elite athletes, and then a business unit that is more for consumers. So depending on the actual structure of the organization, how they separate their business units, they would have those different divisions structured in that way. And then a matrix structure we tend to see more in project-based organizations. And so we then have the projects overseen by a project manager. So you might think of this structure often in a festival. So in our example where we looked at that French festival, they had that structure where they had, the person who looks after all the production, then there was the programming person, then there was, can't even remember anymore, like the marketing person. So it was a sort of blend between the functional and the matrix because they all worked collaboratively to create that same one product together, and were different pieces of that puzzle. So you can think of that as a sort of matrix, looking at that as a single project. I'll let you guys dive into this in the book, which is table 5.4, that goes through some of the strengths and weaknesses attached to each of those different structures. I won't take up more of your time rabbiting on about it here. You can have a look at and have a think about the different organizations that you might work for or work with, or the different organizations that you might be interested in running. What structure would work best for them? And what might be some of the pros and cons associated with those different organizational structures. And if you're working with them, either as an employee or as a client, how might you navigate some of these strengths and weaknesses? So moving on to so that was the more kind of traditional ways of thinking about organizational structure. We've now got sort of more evolved different types. Again, I don't want to get too bogged down in it, but it just kind of gives you some different options and ways of thinking about how you might design the different departments or the way you kind of going to set up the structure of an organization. So sometimes we have work teams. This is kind of becoming more the norm now. You might see this in a lot of kind of tech companies. They'll have little teams, so they'll be responsible for little aspects of a project, and that team will do this bit and that team will do this bit, and then they'll kind of come together. Projects, which is where you've got that single project that's being an output. So maybe in construction, this is often a project structure. So you've actually got a team that comes together to produce a particular project, and they work together on that project, and then they move on to the next project. A boundaryless structure, which is one that you're probably going to be more inclined to encounter, particularly if you're working in anything to do with like a portfolio career, where you might be dipping in and out of different organizations, or if you've got organizations that are created for a particular purpose that then just come together and then disappear again. So again, often festivals are run that way. Or you might have collaborative projects that you're working with people, say, to produce a particular piece of art, and then you might bring in people to help with different aspects of it. And so you can think of it as a bit of an organization that is bringing in different people at different times, and there's no definite structure attached to that. And again, some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. And this last one, which is the boundaryless structure, also includes these next two types of organizational structures, which is virtual and network. So virtual is a little bit what I was talking about before. And we see this a lot now in the music industry, where we have, you know, different people who might be specialists in their own field, or, you know, working as contractors or freelancers. And so, you know, say if you're a band manager, you might have graphic designers that you work with, that you sort of bring in to kind of create the artwork for the any posters or t-shirts, or if you're in charge of the album artwork, you might work with graphic designers over there. You might work with different venues, you know, over time. You might be working with different audio technicians, different booking agents. So your organization might be just you in a kind of day-to-day sense, but as an organization, you've got all these different players that work together in a coordinated way in a kind of virtual organizational sense. And so then this kind of also leads to this networked organization, which is where, you know, the graphic designer is also working with other people like you. The audio tech is working with other people like you. And so we can think of each individual as kind of being connected to the other individuals and working across all those different providers and clients. And so we can use technology, obviously, to help keep us connected. This is particularly important in a virtual or a networked organization, like how you're actually going to communicate together, how you're going to come together so that people can work collaboratively on projects. So we've got heaps of technology that can help with that, everything from email to Slack to whatever. I'm sure you guys are across that. If not, we can get into it at some stage. And then we also want to be thinking about our cultural implications if we're working across cultures or globally or across different countries. And we looked at that in our earlier module as well. But these kinds of things can influence and affect the ways that we need to think about how we're going to design and structure our organization. And then our last little component in this video is the idea of the learning organization. So this idea comes from the work of a guy called Peter Senge, who took the idea of complex adaptive systems, which is a term that comes from ecology, and applied it to organizations to start thinking about what is it that helps an organization to be adaptive and responsive in the environment that it works in. So this goes back to the Darwinian idea of survival of the fittest. Fittest not necessarily being the strongest or the fastest or the best, but the one that is best adapted to its environment. And so being a learning organization is our key way as an organizational entity to being able to learn. Means that we're able to adapt and change to our environment. And so thinking about how do we have a learning organization can be a real benefit to how we're going to structure both our organization in terms of its efficiency and its ability to achieve its mission, but also to be adaptive by being a learning organization. And so the learning organization has these 4 different characteristics. So I'll just quickly whiz through them, although you guys can read. So first of all, the actual design of the organisation. Often the boundarylessness, being boundaryless, is very helpful because, and as you can think of with that networked idea, you know, if you're working with people that are then working with other organisations, they're going to be able to bring in that knowledge and those different ideas to you. Yeah. So that, whereas if you've got a team that is very insular and all kind of together all the time, the influence of other ideas it's going to be harder for those to come in. So moving towards that more networked and virtual structure can give you, it can result in some inefficiencies because, you know, you haven't got people kind of just working on the same projects together all the time. And as an individual, it can be, you know, you can feel like you're kind of going, oh, what am I doing today? But it does help create that learning. And so having smaller, well-integrated teams can help, as well as having highly empowered teams. The other aspect is information sharing. So the information both being open, right? So it's not like people are holding on to information over here and nobody else can see it and it's very secretive and nobody tells anyone anything else. That the information comes at a timely, so that it's not, again, you know, you don't want the opposite of being too closed as being too open, which is just that people can't actually get anything done because they're just consuming information. So being able to access the right information at the right time is important, and obviously that the information is accurate. So we want to be working on good, real facts rather than, you know, speculation or information that is wrong. Leadership, the kind of, one of the characteristics of learning organisations is that there's a very strong shared vision in the leadership that filters down, right? So people all together, there's leaders that have a clear vision, but that vision is shared then across and throughout the organisation. So people feel like they're all going in the same direction and are headed towards the same thing. And that the leadership is collaborative as well. So again, moving away from that very top-down type idea to a more collaborative type of organisation. And then the organisational culture, which is what we'll get into in our next video, where we have a lot of mutuality in relationships, right? So again, it's this differentiation of power is not as strong. So people feel like they have common purpose, but also that they are kind of on the same level as each other, can help create a strong organizational culture and help that exchange of learning. Yep, so it's not like, well, I'm the boss, so I'm not going to learn anything from you, but that mutual feedback happens that enables that constant learning to occur. Having a strong sense of community within the organization, which, as you can imagine, if we're dealing with a boundaryless team, can be really challenging. So getting that balance right between having a sense of we're all in this together and we feel connected to each other in a community sense, versus we're all just doing our own thing and we're working on this project, but we're not kind of really together. So having that balance, having that imbalance is going to be important, particularly as we move more and more towards portfolio careers and virtual organisations. How do we maintain a sense of community and collaboration in that, as well as levels of caring and trust? So having people that actually care about each other, that, you know, there's not backstabbing, there's not that very competitive nature between them, can help, because it enables us to learn from each other. It's very hard to learn from somebody that you don't trust and that either you don't care about or you feel like doesn't care about you. So that's our little snapshot of a learning organisation. I encourage you to think about where you've seen this either done well or done poorly, and what you think some of the impacts of that may have been.